Now let's start. Okay. So, understanding bitters. Now, if you have questions, let's just leave them until maybe 45 minutes from now, okay? Because everything has to be translated for me, so it takes a bit of time. Bitters are essentially the building blocks of medicine. And medicine, today, 75% of what we take in the medicinal world comes from synthetic pharmaceuticals. 25% comes from plants. But 5,000 years ago, everything came from plants. Now, there is very little recorded history on how we can look back 5,000 years to find out what they were doing. But what we do know is that during that time, there were 3 of the original stills found. One in Turkey, one in India, and one in China. All have different elevations, different temperatures, different climates. Now, we know that they were doing different things at high temperatures and condensing flavors and ingredients under high heat in order to produce a certain result. Everybody has heard the word alchemy. Alchemy actually has less to do with alcohol and herbs and more to do with metal. So as people start to heat things like mercury, like other things that are incredibly bad for you, they didn't know at the time. If something was used to make you better, they didn't know enough in the moment that it could inflame something else and make you sicker in a different way. So it took a long time to figure out how to make things that were good for you. Now, we don't say anything about alcohol being good for you at all. But what we do say is that there are certain herbs and different ingredients that we all know of on the planet that make us feel better. And the easiest way to extract the character, the properties, the flavor, the pigment, is by extracting through alcohol, because alcohol can be made from any fermentable sugar. It is free of additional sugar at the end. It's free of color. It's free of any other preservative. So we know that it is the most natural way to extract all of the properties from a single ingredient that could be quite good for you, and also combined together could have additional properties, but it might not taste very good. So it took a long time to get to the point where things taste balanced, they taste delicious, and impart that certain flavor. En français, we say je ne sais quoi. It's a certain I don't know what that dries out the cocktail, that combines flavors, that creates depth and complexity. And what started out as a very small container, a small little shot. Raphael, do we have like a little double-sided jigger just to see for a moment? Or a jigger of some kind, just even anything. That's fine. Yep. Thank you. What would start as a tiny volume of liquid to make you feel better 200 years ago in New Orleans would turn into a larger cup, a larger glass, with beautiful brands at the heart, with more variety of ingredients, flavors, and bottles to choose from than we've ever had before today in 2018. Even in a market like Panama, in Central America, where we don't maybe have as much here as, say, the United States, but there's still more than there was 200 years ago. So, everybody with me so far? Don't be afraid to say, yes, I am. Yes, I am. That's when you come in and you say, yes, I am.
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Gracias. Okay, very good. So, what are bitters? Bitters are high-proof infusions with thoughtful ingredients. Now, we talk about 5,000 years ago of how they made some of the original infusions and some of the original medicines. But how do we get to where we are today? Now, we can't talk about bitters without talking about some of the classic examples. Everybody in the room, raise your hand if you have heard of a product called chartreuse. Raise your hand, or keep it up, if you have heard of a brand called Campari. Have you heard of a brand called Fernet Branca?
Campari. ¿Conocen Campari?
Red, dry vermouth. Right? Aperol. There's so many. All of these different brands and different ingredients were created with bitter ingredients at the heart in order to provide depth and complexity and sort of an aperitif and a digestive character to the cocktails that we drink, to help aid in digestion or to help get us very hungry for what's coming next. Now, for bitters, We want to make sure that we're putting ingredients together that tell a story, that are just as balanced as the food and beverage they go into at the end. But also, it's important to remark that each of the ingredients that's in front of you today that we're going to be making bitters with are all safe ingredients. These are all legally purchased. They are legally available. Anything that was weird and showed up in a bag without a label, I smelled, and then we decided, nah, we're gonna just leave it over there, because you're just not sure. So if today, don't feel afraid to get creative and get excited to put different ingredients together. No problem. So, if we use alcohol as the base to extract flavor, how did we know how to do that? I like to talk about the cave family, okay? Neanderthal, like old school primitive humans. They would go out into the forest and they would pick berries and pick fruit. And if they lived in a place where there was no fruit available, maybe they grew grains instead. They pick the grains and bring them back to their little cave hut with their little cave family. Eat what they want for the day. Put the rest into a container. They did not have airtight containers or mason jars back then. They would just be stones. So you put them somewhere, you put a lid on it, you come back the next day, and you enjoy a couple more pieces. What does that do? Well, eventually it starts to ferment, because on the surface of every piece of fruit is natural yeast and bacteria that will start fermentation automatically if it's in the right condition, the right moisture, the right temperature, the right climate. So what happened, I'm gonna eat that, don't worry, I touched it. Bring it over here. We'll get to all my issues in just a moment. So if we have this fruit, you go back and you take a bite, you think, oh, that's kind of interesting. Slightly acidic, it's slightly oxidative, it's got a bit of bubble happening in the mouth, because that's what happens when you ferment ingredients. Come back the next day, now it looks like it's decaying. I'm trying to look at an example. It looks like it's falling apart, it's decomposing. You don't want to eat that, even though the effects of fermentation may have continued. Alcohol being a byproduct of fermentation. Maybe you just close your eyes, you take a little piece, you eat it, you're like, oh, okay, looks terrible, but, ooh, what is this euphoric feeling? They don't realize that in the end that they might be drunk or feeling what would later be known as slightly intoxicated. They just don't know. So eventually, instead of picking up that piece of something that looks terrible, they crush it into liquid and drink it instead. Now, if that's fruit, you're drinking wine. And wine is the base for everything that goes into the still made from fruit. Even if it's apricots. If apricots you ferment with water, you just allow it to ferment, the liquid at a certain alcohol percentage goes into the still, you cook it at a certain temperature, the vapors rise and then get condensed back down into liquid, and now you have a brandy. Wine is the base for all brandy. Everybody clear on that? Great. Now in terms of grains, let's talk about Ireland and Scotland. The first distillation technology would come from these areas and brought there by monks. Now the monks in Asia, the monks in Tibet, Mongolia, would travel through different parts of the world, bringing the technology of distillation with them. The technology on distillation, for them, being that it was made from grains, could have been that the grains, you soak them in order to release the starches. We know this from the method that is taken to ferment barley to make into whiskey. We know that barley, just dry barley on its own, you have to ferment, you have to start to sprout or malt, the process that goes into creating the sugar available to make whiskey. So if you soak it in water for 24 to 48 hours, it starts to sprout, right? We've all kind of done this at home or seen it being done. That sprouted little grain that comes up, we know that now the sugar is available. So you can eat that by the handful if you like. It's quite delicious and very good for you. If we continue to allow it to ferment in water, it will, all of a sudden, the sugar will start to convert to alcohol from the natural yeast and bacteria that's in the atmosphere. And now this liquid, which you originally were just using to soak your grains, perhaps to make porridge, perhaps to make something else over the fire, has now turned into a beer. And beer is the base for every distilled beverage that is made from grains, regardless of whether it's wheat, it's rye, it's barley. We like to call the potato as being in a weird category because tuber is the family that potato, sweet potato, belongs to. Now we know soju and shoju sometimes can be made from roots and tubers, potatoes. We know some vodka is made from potatoes. So that's kind of like fits into a different category. So what I'm trying to say is that you can essentially make alcohol from anything. Now if we know that we can make alcohol from anything, why do we put so much stuff in it? Not all alcohol back then tasted good. So in an effort to make alcohol taste good, we started adding sweeteners. In an effort to make alcohol, this extraction method for medicinal properties from different ingredients, we start to add different botanicals, maybe 1, maybe 10, maybe 20. In the case of chartreuse, maybe 150. So if we go back that 5,000 years and then we come all the way up to the 1600s, the 1600s is where we have the example of the Carthusian monks settling in France in the town of Grenoble, which is now where chartreuse is made. And in the early 1600s, the elixir of life with 150 different ingredients would be presented by one monk called Annibal d'Estrées, and he would say, this is the water of life. This is the elixir of life. This is going to cure everything that ails you. It's going to bring you closer to God, to spirituality. Drink this. And they said, oh, before you go, can we have the recipe? No. And then he leaves. But of course, monks don't speak, so they have to sign that they're not going to give each other the recipes. Listen, that was a joke. The fact that you guys aren't laughing is stressing me out here. Thank you so much. So, doesn't have the recipe. It would take the monks 130 years to figure out the closest possible recipe to that first little bottle of bitters and the elixir of life that was presented. So in 1737, that first green chartreuse, well, the elixir vegetal would come out. 1764, now almost 30 years later, would be green chartreuse, and is the same recipe that we still use today behind the bar to make a last word or to have on ice or whatever the case may be. It wouldn't be now until about 60 or 70 years later, a very sweet and approachable version called yellow chartreuse, the chartreuse amarillo, see, it's good Spanish, would come out. And this now would be the same things that we use 250 years later. So before then, we don't really have any specific examples that are still around. Chartreuse really is the oldest one, and that's why we spend so much time talking about it. And 150 different botanicals, herbs, and spices. I mean, it's kind of exceptional that the flavor and the color of that particular liquid still exists today in the way that it was intended in the first place 250 years ago. So things that are happening around us in these regions, like France will have a very specific series of herbs, spices, roots, and barks in which to make a medicinal tincture. And in other parts of the world, perhaps Italy, perhaps China, India, Canada, US, Latin America, you'll have your own indigenous spices. Now, for anyone that understands the story and the history of spices, pepper, as a peppercorn, would start in one part of the world in Southeast Asia and have multiple species and have multiple places where perhaps the same variant would grow. White pepper, black pepper, green pepper, pink pepper, telecherry pepper, pondicherry pepper. They all come from the same part of the world, but different regions. So similar to coffee, coffee in Panama tastes different than coffee in Guatemala, it tastes different than coffee in Mexico. Latin America coffee tastes different than African coffee, tastes different than Indonesian coffee, right? So it's very interesting in the same way that we think about grapes. Because Sancerre, which is a white Sauvignon Blanc from Loire Valley in France, tastes completely different than New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and tastes completely different than, say, Canadian Sauvignon Blanc from the Okanagan Valley. So when we think about spices as well, even if we found the exact recipe for one of our favorite bitters of all times, depending on where in the world you are, will fundamentally taste different every time, because spices go through the same understanding of terroir as coffee, grapes, cacao, spices. They all taste different, you know? So when they started in China, China would have been traditional Chinese medicine. India would have been Ayurveda, which is the study of spices, hot and cold spices, and how it affects the circulation and flow of your body. Yoga is connected to that. Everybody knows that, right? So it's very interesting. Today, we feel so mired in the moment that we don't have certain things available. But honestly, this is the golden age of cocktails right now. We have more available today in all markets, like 60 countries that we do world class, than there have been ever. So it's very exciting. I'm excited for you guys to make bitters today. So let's see if I missed anything. Wild and accidental fermentation, we covered. Agriculture, things that grow around us, right? Also, before currency was paper bills and coins, it was bartering. It was trading goods and services with people that needed what you had. So for me, I always like to use the example of maybe I'm an adorable little French farmer and I have my little goat and I say, oh, I have stomach pain. Mr. Chartreuse, can I have some chartreuse? They say, I want your goat. Okay, you're hungry, I have pain. 1 bottle of chartreuse for 1 small goat. I feel like the currency's off though. I feel like it's 1 goat for like the whole distillery. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Geography, altitude, and temperature. We know from, thank you. It's a delayed reaction for laughing, or you're coughing, or I'm not sure. The location of stills, beer and wine. Okay, so this is all in the little package. So this is why I say I don't want you to follow along. I just want you to listen, because I tell jokes. They're bad jokes, but I tell them. If you fall asleep, I'm going to throw things at you.
It's imports.
Terroir, spirits and botanicals, bartering. So I love this picture as well. Now, I'm sure you all are aware that I make bitters as well, right? I've been making bitters for over half of my career. My career started in 1998, working in the industry, started bartending in 2000, so about 18 years now. I started making bitters in 2008. And originally, before I made bitters, I made tinctures. Tinctures are a pure expression of one botanical, sometimes known as extract. The most common example being vanilla. Vanilla is literally vanilla beans put into alcohol and extracted. Vanilla on its own, I don't know if anyone's tasted vanilla extract by itself, but you should. It's awful. It's absolutely awful. The reason is because it doesn't have anything else going on. So if you imagine vanilla extract, flavor profile-wise and deliciousness-wise, compared to the bitters that doesn't taste good. You can't just take a jar, stick things in, and hope it's going to taste good. You have to balance the bitters and balance the extract in the same way as you would balance a cocktail. We always say in the cooking world, you don't cook with bad wine. Because, oh, the wine's off, throw it in the stew. Oh, no, the wine is off. Go clean your toilet with it. You know, water the garden, throw it out. Bad wine makes bad food, right? So the cooks have an advantage though, because they take vanilla extract and they transform it into something else. We know that white flour, white sugar, and North American or American butter in general, and margarine, doesn't taste like anything, right? It tastes like texture. It doesn't really have a flavor. It doesn't even taste like grains. Flour doesn't even taste like grains. What we do when we make cakes and cookies, we add vanilla extract, because vanilla extract is life to things that are otherwise quite dull. When we add salt to food when we're cooking, it doesn't make food salty. It makes the ingredients bloom and pop. We use salt and pepper ubiquitously in that way when we cook. It brings out the best flavor. When we add vinegar to food, it doesn't make it overly aggressive. It makes it right with acidity. In the same way we use lemon in a cocktail. We use bitters in a cocktail in the same way that cooks use vanilla extract in food. That makes sense to everyone? Yeah! Right on! Awesome. Okay, lastly, the evolution and discovery, travel, proof. So as the peppercorn is a great example, pepper, ginger, cinnamon, they all sort of migrated from one part of the world and went the other way. You know? Before, I mean, we're standing in Panama, for God's sakes. It's like Panama Canal, right? I mean, the Panama Canal, once that happened, it drastically changed the way that we're, you can clap, you should clap for that, because it's a very in the same way that the Suez Canal ended up connecting parts of the Indian Ocean and like the Indian Ocean community to Europe without having to go all the way around Africa. And for explorers and people that are traveling from the New World or the Old World to the New World and back and forth, they can all of a sudden access the Pacific Ocean by traveling through the Panama Canal, which is amazing. So we have all of these spices, and I was actually unaware until recently that cloves was originally called black gold, because cloves, coming from the eastern side of Africa and India, would actually make its migration, and that's why you see cloves in so many different foods all around the world. It didn't originate here, it didn't originate in Australia, it didn't originate in Northern Europe or Northern Africa. It originates from one specific part of the world and eventually gets carried on ships and moves around the world. Sugarcane, Papua New Guinea, it comes to the other parts of the world. Chili peppers come from a specific region and move to other parts of the world. So it's very interesting when you make bitters. All of these products might be available here now, but I think in the beginning it was probably only this part of the table, you know, or perhaps things that are now called dangerous and we don't use them anymore, as an example. Lastly, proof. I think when we talk about the history of bitters and the history of alcohol, we can chronicle the way the world was discovered. And I always love that. We talk about English Navy rum. We talk about rum, how it has different categories. Now, Zacapa rum, which is part of the reserve portfolio globally, we have as a very specific type of rum that doesn't fit into any of the three. We have English rum, we have Spanish rum, and we have French rum. Now, what happens is with rum, we can make rum from any fermentable sugar, right? So we don't have any licorice on the table, but it was an interesting experiment we did in Guatemala 2 days ago, because we passed around the licorice root. We said, everybody take a bite. They take a bite, and it was so sweet. Because before the discovery of sugarcane and transporting that to other parts of the world, licorice root was used as sweetener. And so it shouldn't be a surprise that in England and parts of Europe, that a lot of things are licorice-based. The flavor of anise, the flavor of licorice, because it's quite sweet. Now we can do that actually with star anise, and if everybody, when you come up here to taste through some of the ingredients, pay special attention to the star anise. Oh, en español?
Anís estrella. Anís estrella.
Okay, very good. Anise! Whatever. I keep forgetting I have my lovely ladies over there that translating. They keep saying star anise, star anise, star anise. What's it translated? But when you bite into it, it's quite sweet. It's quite sweet, and I think that's very surprising for some people. So these sailors, in order to make sure, because I don't know if you've ever seen any documentaries about how horrific the conditions were for sailors. I mean, you've all seen Pirates of the Caribbean? Fine. I don't know how true the stories are, but you've seen their teeth, you see how unhealthy they are, and they're just angry curmudgeon people. Because sailors, I mean, these were the workers, this is like the lowest of the low. And so for them, the thing to look forward to every single day would be one imperial pint of liquor. Now, to know that they weren't being ripped off by the people that were employing them, they had to get proof that it was 50% alcohol. What they did is they took the rum, they poured it on gunpowder, lighted on fire. If it burned a pure blue flame, there was 100% proof that their alcohol was a 50% alcohol, which at the time would just be full strength alcohol. So Navy strength rum, for that reason, is always higher than the standard proof that we normally do for our spirits, which is 40%. It's a cool story though. There's another story that comes from Kentucky, and it was before Kentucky was separated as a state. And we had Virginia, which was quite large and moved westward across the country. And the barrels of whiskey were so good, but people were just buying them and then diluting them with water, with like colored water, and then they would sell them to people and say that it was, you know, American whiskey. So it had to be dumped on either gunpowder or another substance and burned a pure blue flame to make sure that they weren't being ripped off, that it wasn't a 20%, garbage that they were getting. So beautiful photos. These photos, that's my hand. I don't know if I'm hand model. See? Look at that. See? Famous to have it in a PowerPoint. That vanilla, I'm so happy I took that photo when I did. We don't even have vanilla on the table. Do you know why?
It's expensive.
It is the single most expensive botanical in the world now. So that amount of vanilla that I'm holding there, which is probably 500 grams, I would say, when I bought it, was about 80 bucks. 80 bucks Canadian, I'm not sure. Well, you guys use American dollars here, yeah? Okay, so it's about like $60, $65, okay?
Shit.
Back then, maybe
Dos.
even less because
Dos
the
vallas
Canadian
$7
dollar was
fueron.
garbage. Today, that amount of vanilla in Canada for me to purchase is, if it's available, it's about $200 now. So the price has increased by about, 300%. It's crazy. The top right, this is white peppercorns. Now, a lot of people don't realize that white peppercorn and black peppercorn are the same species. Just we take the cover off to reveal the pepper inside the seed, and that becomes the other color of pepper. So this is quite floral, and because in the old world, in the UK and Western Europe, they like their food to look very pure, very pristine, and having all these unique spices coming from other parts of the world. So we see white pepper used quite a bit, so you don't see flecks of black on the food. So when you make like a beurre blanc, which is a butter sauce with white wine, acid, and salt and pepper, oftentimes it's white pepper. Bottom left, this looks like the surface of Mars. It's not. This is another really sought after bark and root that is used primarily in making tonic water. Does anyone know what it is? Quinina, cinchona bark. So the medicinal compound in cinchona bark is quinidine. And quinidine is the ingredient that was used in tonic water, developed as part of a way to ward off malaria or help people that were suffering from malaria. And if you follow sort of like the chronicle on how that came to be, we know malaria comes from different parts of the world, but it still exists in the Kruger Animal Reserve, even in South Africa. So even when we were competing in South Africa, I don't know if you took pills with you or not, I had them with me, malaria pills, but I wasn't sure I was going to take them or not. I didn't know if I was going to go anywhere with malaria-affected areas. But tonic water, when different parts of the world were being settled by, whether it was British or Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, French, we would have to find different things from nature to help us cope with this alien worlds that we were going into, where we weren't prepared to deal with the sicknesses. Now, all of the bitters that I make that are citrus-based use quinidine as a base, but use cinchona bark. Because of this raw product, only about 10% of it is quinidine. For those of you that are determined to make your own tonic water, quinidine is one of the ingredients that is incredibly dangerous. And you have to really understand how to use it, just in the same way as smoking, right, is bad for you. Everywhere on the label it says this is bad for you, it's probably going to kill you. Why put tobacco leaf into anything that you're giving to people? Like, I don't understand that. So it's all just thinking a little bit further. Just because you have access to something doesn't mean that you should use it very frivolously. You should still be quite prepared and quite researched and very thoughtful in how you use it. Cooks in the kitchen, in the best restaurants in the world, I would say in all restaurants, but that's not wood. I knock on wood of some kind. The best restaurants in the world, they don't give you ingredients they haven't researched and they don't understand. They say, oh, please try my creme brulee topped with a tobacco leaf crust. Because tobacco leaf isn't good for you. Same with tonka beans, you have to use them in very small quantities. The pits of cherries, nectarines, and peaches have sort of an almond flavor, it's called noyu. But that, if it's not treated correctly and not brought to a certain temperature, can be quite bad for you and poisonous, carries a small amount of cyanide, right? Everything on this table is safe. There's no peach pits, there's no tobacco, there's no, okay? Bottom right, this is what a blend looks like for Kensington Aromatic Bitters, which has about 35 different ingredients in it. We have to consider how ingredients react as a single extraction and how ingredients react as a combined extraction. If you were to take, like in the previous picture, you were to extract individual ingredients and make tinctures or extracts and blend them together, it will taste different than those exact same ingredients that go in together and hang out for a month under alcohol. It will always taste a little bit different. So, cocktail origins. You guys like my pick? Look at that. So cute, right? The most expensive single piece of bar tool I've ever purchased, and I don't think I've paid for it still. I think I have an outstanding invoice from the last 2 years. This is a Ralph Lauren skull pick. We never brought them into the bar because I knew they'd go missing immediately. I actually saw one of my bartenders go, "This is so cool," and they grabbed them on the way out. And I said, "Give me that." So, with the cocktail origins, the reason why it's hyphenated at the top is because the cock-tail was the first time it appeared in print. It was written like that. And when we talk about the history of bitters, okay, so we've come from our Neanderthal cave person family, from like 5,000 years ago. We're coming up to this moment. We've gone through medicine. We've gone through prohibition from 1919 to 1933, where nothing was available unless you had a prescription, which means nothing was available unless it was bitters and you had a prescription. We know that chartreuse is one of the oldest still existing examples of what happens when you blend different flavors together in large quantities. And then we also know that the cocktail will celebrate 212 years on May 13th, 2018, because the first time the word cock-tail appeared in print was May 13th, 1806. It's now called World Cocktail Day. Vulgarly described as a bittered sling, the cocktail is a combination of bitter spirits, water and sugar, and works as an electioneering potion in the fact that it fuddles the head but renders the heart sincere. What that means is that if you have something that's lightly bittered, lightly sweetened, lightly diluted, it's going to taste better. That is the original cocktail. You take alcohol, like maybe whiskey at the time, that wouldn't be of the same quality as the whiskey we have today, which you can drink straight. We had to add certain modifiers, like the bitters, the spirits, the water, and the sugar, all together to make sure that it tasted balanced and tasted good. As people start to feel a little fuddled in the head, you can say, "Now, go and vote for my friend Bob." They're like, "Okay. Sincerely, I vote for Bob," because they're feeling kind of out of their minds. They're like, "Whatever, this person keeps feeding me alcohol, we'll vote for whoever we want." So what came first, the chicken or the egg cup? If you can imagine, so we don't have that jigger, right? The double-sided jigger, do we have one? If you find one. Okay. We're going to come back to that for a
40,000
moment.
bartenders en un jigger, no joda.
So at the bar, you see underneath where you're sitting, there is a bar rail, goes across the bottom of the bar. Everybody has one in their bar. They don't realize why it's there, but they know that it's really fun to sort of stand on, to lean, put your foot down, leaning over. So, amazing, thank you. So back in New Orleans, we used to have coffee shops. Now the coffee shops in the daytime would be a place that I would normally hang out 250 years ago, 200 years ago, because I am addicted to coffee. I love coffee. I drink about 100 a day. Makes me very happy. Paulo's in the same boat. He's got a problem. You go into these coffee shops, you have your coffee, and then you sit and you think, well, they got a lot of stuff on their little back bar there. But it wouldn't have been a back bar. It would have been a wall of different medicines, different ingredients, different things. You say, I'm having my coffee, but I've got like a little bit of a cough, They say, I've got the perfect thing for you. So they turn around, take the things off the wall, do whatever, turn back around, and in this tiny little cocotte en français, but this is an egg cup, we'll anglicize cocotte into cocktail. They have the small ingredients in here, alcohol as part of the base because it's the extraction method, and all of a sudden, what started as the small side of this double-sided cocotte would eventually increase to the larger size because people liked what they were drinking, and then there would be more bitters available. So Peychaud, cognac, imported cognac, absinthe called Herbe Saint from New Orleans, a little bit of sugar mixed together, we called the Peychaud cocktail, which would eventually be called the Sazerac. Now that started in New Orleans, and that comes from the little egg cup, which eventually became a glass, and eventually the counters that were up to here, and you had to stand on the rail and be like, hello, trying to find the pharmacist to give you what you need. All of a sudden, the counters get lower. They start to dress better, not wearing lab coats. They look really cool. Lights go down. Outside gets a little darker. Maybe they have their New Orleans jazz band is turning up the volume a little bit. New Orleans is high volume all the time anyway. And now we have different bitters. Now we have different alcohols that are from the US, different liqueurs, different sugars. And all of a sudden, people are happier. This is like the first bar, right? And so things that would become coffee shops in the daytime and pharmacies in the daytime would become what would be known as bars in the evening. We've got the bar right here separating the guest from the bartender, the guest from the pharmacist. And all of a sudden, the bar rail is still there today, but now we put chairs so people can stay a while. It's pretty cool. So that's chronicling the history of spirits against the world. It's, as more things become available, and this is an amazing city to talk about that in. As more spirits and ingredients become available, we make different cocktails, right? What started as maybe the old-fashioned in 1806, vulgarly called the bitter and slang, combination of bitter spirits, water, and sugar. Eventually, maraschino liqueur, or Cointreau, or different things would start to be imported into the US. Why use sugar, lump sugar, when you can use a liqueur? Oh, that sounds interesting. Sounds a bit like a cresta. So the cresta could be the evolution of the old-fashioned, because the old-fashioned doesn't specify whiskey. It could have been cognac, because the Sazerac was made from cognac. Sazerac, Père et Fils, cognac, which eventually would go out of business. They would buy the rights in New Orleans. Sazerac company that makes whiskey at Buffalo Trace still makes it today. So it's like a lot of history. So the history of potable bitters, we talked about that. We talked about chartreuse, and we talked about Fernet, we talked about all of these different things. And the history of non-potable bitters, these guys, things that are administered in dashes and drops because they're far too powerful to drink by themselves. These are all modifiers, We would have different reasons for using different styles of bitters. In the 1830s, when Peychaud bitters came out, it was made in New Orleans. So it was made in an apothecary specifically to medicate people. By adding it to the Peychaud cocktail, which would become the Sazerac, was the right way to administer that particular medicine. Angostura bitters, which would come out in 1824, which would have been about 14 years before Peychaud bitters, comes from Venezuela. Surgeon General Seegert, who is from, wooing. I know, you're like, Venezuela, oh, yeah. Venezuela? Hey-o. Okay, very good. So we know that the Surgeon General of Bolivar's army was a German doctor named Seegert, and he came to Venezuela, to the town of Angostura, and he would have developed this incredible medicinal blend of different herbs and spices, which would not include the bark of Angostura tree, but it would just be named for the town. Eventually it would move to Trinidad and Tobago, where it's still made today. It's still the most widely used bitters on the planet. Now, if you fast forward to another way they use Peychaud bitters in New Orleans, we talk about the Vieux Carré. The Vieux Carré combines 2 dashes each of Peychaud bitters and Angostura bitters. So there is some lineage on how these bitters companies end up playing together at the hands of the pharmacist or the bartender. Now, survival of the fittest. I did talk about Prohibition just for a second, because Prohibition created this moment in time where it was really good for certain people, for people that were involved in the import and export and production when they shouldn't have been. It was very good for them. Maybe not in the end, but during that time, if you've seen Boardwalk Empire, seen anything to do with the Chicago mob, it was a good time for those guys. But during that time, we see the death of almost all the bitters except for Angostura and Peychaud and Abbott's bitters. Abbott's bitters would survive Prohibition and would die eventually just after, in maybe the 50s and 60s. It's now being brought back to life. There's a company in the US called Tempus Fugit who's bringing that back to life. We also see Boker's bitters go off the market, which is now being produced by Dr. Adams' company in Aberdeen, Scotland. So, you know, bitters, we didn't see any new inventions of bitters until really like the 1990s. And 1990s would have been when Gaz Regan or Gary Regan would have created the orange bitters, Gaz Regan's orange bitters, which is available, I think, on most bars, produced by Buffalo Trace, the same company that still produces Peychaud bitters. Now, those bitters would be the only ones that would exist until the Bitter Truth Company in the early 2000s would open their line of bitters from Germany. But can you imagine, from the end of Prohibition in 1933 until really the end of the 1990s, we had nothing available. But we didn't know, because bartenders didn't know anything then either. It wouldn't be until like the 1980s that Dale DeGroff, and we all know Dale DeGroff, he's our daddy, he's a daddy, that he would start working at the Rainbow Room with Joe Baum, and he would start using fresh juices, and he would start trying to find ways to revitalize different classics. Murray Stenson, also in Seattle, would help to revitalize. There's tons of cocktail historians out there, Jared Brown, Anastasia Miller. They were responsible for the first Tales of the Cocktail Festival, you know, like almost 20 years ago. And so everybody is scrounging and scooping and scuttling around trying to find these old cocktail books, old recipes, and bringing these things back to life, which was from the Belle Epoque, the old golden age of cocktails, which would have been 1890 to 1920. That's when we see vaudeville, we see circuses, we see literary geniuses, we see the blend of Art Nouveau and Art Deco, we see Machine Age Deco, which is something like the LA Times building or the Empire States building, the Paris Metro. You know, all of those things are part of a certain era during the Belle Epoque. But I don't know about you, I don't know many people that are left over from the Belle Epoque. In fact, my grandmother, Rose, is turning 100 on May 18th, but she's from Canada, so she will see the Belle Epoque of how it was affected in Canada. Now in Canada, 1918 was the end of World War I, which was the Great War. So for her, the Belle Epoque would have been a little different while she was growing up in the 20s. But for anybody that can read memoirs and history books of people that grew up during those times, and maybe having conversations with your grandparents in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and most of us were probably born in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s maybe, except for Paolo, who was born in the 40s. Good skin cream. But unless we have these conversations, I mean, most of them won't really talk about cocktails. Has everybody seen Mad Men? The show Mad Men? So Mad Men's really interesting because they entertain at home a lot. And entertaining at home was a very high society thing. You went out for drinks to bars during the week, but on the weekend you'd have people over and you'd be making cocktails at home. You see Don Draper in one of the episodes with Connie Hilton. He jumps over the bar to make an old fashioned, which he made with soda water, with seltzer, you know? But again, it's no different than the original recipe, bitter spirits, water, and sugar. Ice wouldn't have even come out and be commercialized until the beginning of the 1900s. So before that, bitter spirits, water, and sugar, water was legitimately water, you know? So, how to build bitters. In front of you, each of you has a little lid with some ingredients. So this is an experiment that I really like to do. For those of you that don't have the ingredients, can I have maybe a couple more pieces of orange peel?
Orange peel?
Yeah. Now, everybody in front of them has 3 botanicals. You have lavender, you have orange peel, and you have black cardamom. So I'm going to bring some orange for you. So I want everybody to pick up the lavender. Pick up the lavender, put it in the palm of your hand. I'm going to do it too. Now, I'm not going to use a mic for this part because I want to do this with you guys, okay? I'll just put it right here. No, I won't. Put it in my hands. Okay, we're going to take the lavender in our hands, okay? And use your, thank you. Hola. ¿Cómo estás? Okay. take the thumb, you're going to rub the lavender in the palm of your hand, okay? And then you're going to stick your nose and breathe. Write down 3 things that you smell. Lavender cannot be one of them. What does lavender smell like? If you were to describe lavender to somebody that had never had lavender before, write down 3. 3 notes. There's no wrong answers here. It's entirely personal. 3 things. Think of if you were doing a wine tasting, okay? A wine tasting, you'd be like, what do you smell? You have this glass of white wine, you swirl it, you smell it, you have to write down 3 things, right? Could be floral, could be citrus. Write it all down though. Write everything down.
The green. Grass.
Okay. Freshly cut grass. Wonderful. Grass. Anything else? Mint? Fresh? Okay. Citric? Does it remind you of some other time in your life? Right. That's how we build taste memory. Right? Okay, write down all those things. Clean. Clean? Clothing. Yep. Okay. Awesome. Okay, now, everyone has 3 things. Maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe 10. Bueno. Okay, get rid of the lavender. Put it back in your little thing.